cool. Yeah. Sorry, I had to do this to you guys, just to give you some context. But yeah, that's how we deal with cookie notices at Brave. Um, um, yeah. On a more serious note, I really hate cookie notices, and I feel like I see them all the time. And I'm sure I'm not the only one who feels like physically disgusted every time I see one in front of the page I'm trying to look at. So, first, maybe a little bit of background on why do we see these things all over the web. As it turns out, advertisers learned a long time ago you can abuse this thing called cookies to basically track user behavior across a whole bunch of different websites on the web. And in doing so, they can more easily manipulate your behavior into spending more of your money than you might want to actually do. So GDPR was kind of a response to this. EU regulators thought this is kind of a bad thing. Let's fix it. And they said, if you want to use cookies, you have to get explicit user consent. And in practice, that doesn't mean that cookies are being used less. It only means that websites are putting this ugly banner in front of everything. And that's really annoying. So us at Brave, we thought that this is not a very fun status quo, and we decided we want to put in some kind of technical measures to do something about it. So we came up with kind of some two technologies here that mostly are addressing this. So first one is ephemeral partition storage. And this is basically preventing two different sites that have a tracker embedded on it from that tracker being able to tell that you're visiting both of those sites and doing anything on them. So each site gets its own special storage area for third-party cookies and local storage and other session-related storage. So that is a huge privacy improvement that's on by default, and that's something that you really have to own the browser in order to be able to make a change. And then forgetful browsing is another thing that is off by default, but if you turn it on, you can actually make it so that each successive visit to a site, every session is completely isolated. And so the site can't even track you across different sessions that you visit. So if you're worried about a site learning about your behavior on the site, you can actually make it look like it's the first time you're visiting the site every time. And together, these two things are really awesome privacy improvements. But it also, if you think about it, now the site doesn't know that you've rejected cookies last time, so they have to show you the banner again. And that's really annoying. So we decided we need to do something about the cookie notices as well. So you might be familiar with a few different ways of blocking cookie notices or managing your privacy preferences on different websites. At Brave, we weren't the first to do this, but we figured, we have an Adblock engine built in. We may as well use Adblock rules for this purpose, since we're already really good at hiding ads and things like that. So we decided to use EasyList Cookie, maintained by Ryan over here. Big shout out. And the four main ways that we deal with cookie notices in EasyList Cookie is, so we can have cosmetic rules, which are finding a cookie notice by a CSS selector and hiding it. We can have network rules if the cookie notice is provided by like a third-party consent management provider. We can block the network request to that consent management provider and prevent that code from being downloaded and executed in the first place. We can also use some script injections. So there's a set cookie, set local storage, set session storage, and those allow us to pretend that you've visited the site in the past and already pressed reject on the cookie banner, even if you haven't ever visited the site in the past. And another one is the click element family. So if you're interested in just clicking on the button as a filter list author, you can do that as well. And not all of these are like equivalent. Sometimes in some cases you might want to use one versus the other for web compat reasons. But it's nice to have all of these available as a toolbox. And so I want to clear up one big misconception that I see online all the time, which is that EasyList Cookie or Brave doesn't actually improve your privacy because it's just hiding the cookie element notices and not actually doing anything with your preferences. And as you can see in the previous slide, we have some rules that are actually dealing with the storage part. So that is not necessarily true. But even if it is only hiding the notice, for a site to be GDPR compliant, you have to get explicit consent from the user by clicking on an accept button or something like that. And if the notice is hidden, then it is literally impossible for you to give explicit consent. So that should be fine. And even if the site isn't compliant with the GDPR, the couple of privacy protections that I detailed earlier kind of make it so that as long as you're using Brave, you're totally safe from this kind of stuff and you have nothing to worry about. So a couple of differences relating to using Adblock rules for ads versus cookie notices. When it comes to ads, a lot of them are served by third parties. And so if you block one particular third-party ad provider or analytics provider, then that actually works on a lot of different sites. But when it comes to cookie notices, it's pretty easy for a web developer to build their own cookie notice. It's just kind of a box with some text in it and a button. And so I think in practice, a lot of web developers create their own cookie notices. And as a result, it's really hard to block all of them unless you can actually visit each site and verify that, okay, this is a rule that works on this site and it doesn't break anything. And speaking of breakage, breakage is certainly common when it comes to cookie notices, and there's a couple of unique things that happen, especially when you consider if there is a notice in front of the page and you hide it, there might still be a backdrop behind the notice. And so it'll end up having a grayed out page, or you won't be able to click on things on the page or scroll through the page. And that's really frustrating for users, and we need to be very careful about that. And that can happen even if we write the rule correctly the first time. Later on, the page might update itself, and then suddenly our rules are breaking the page. Okay, so this is kind of a collection of cookie notices that I've found over the last few months. And EasyList Cookie is one of, or probably the most comprehensive cookie notice blocking solution available today. But even then, I still find all of these, and like I notice them every time, and it's painful. And so I started thinking, is there something I can do about it? And I realized there are a lot of patterns here, right? So every time I see one of these, it's smaller than the page itself. It's floating in front of the page, and there's some text relating to either cookies or privacy or analytics or something like that. And it turns out all of these things are very easy to detect using code. And so I realized, why don't we like automate this thing? So I kind of decided to put together a little bit of proof of concept, and turns out it works. You can detect keywords pretty easily from the inner HTML of an HTML element. The floating part of it is usually from a position style, either sticky or fixed. And the size of the element is pretty easy to detect using its bounding box. And so what I ended up making is a tool that I call Cookie Monster. And so here's a world premiere of it. So it's really just an API that you can enter any website in and configure a few settings and then check for cookie notices. And if there is anything found, it'll bring you a report. It'll show you a screenshot, and you can even inspect the HTML of whatever it detected. And you might be thinking, like, what's the point of this? Can't you do this by just looking at the page, right? Enter it in your URL bar and take a look. The couple of nice things here is that you can configure some settings, so you can change which filter lists are enabled pretty easily. So in particular, if EasyList Cookie is enabled and you still see a cookie notice, that's probably a good chance that EasyList Cookie needs to be improved. You can choose a location, so there's a proxy built into this. Some cookie notices happen to be region-specific, so they will only show to users in the EU or in the US or somewhere else, and this makes it really easy to do that. And a couple of other options, including like device selector. So if you want to check whether it's only visible on a Android or iOS device, you don't have to do that by pulling out a phone. You can just do it directly here. But the most important capability this gives us is if you wanted to check maybe 100,000 websites for cookie notices, now you can do it because you don't have to stare at each one. So that is a pretty powerful tool. And we have been doing a couple of crawls. So our most recent one, we did 30K top domains. And we actually managed to discover 88 confirmed new cookie notices that weren't covered by EasyList Cookie. Most importantly, 66% of these were region specific. So either only in the US or in the EU. And those ones are really hard for us to find manually. So this is an extremely useful tool for us. And it's not 100% accurate, so there is still some manual filtering required of whatever results it comes up with. But the false positive rate is low enough to the point where this is actually feasible to run and just manually review the results afterwards. So that's how it is today. I want to talk about a couple of future improvements, given that this is such a new tool. So, of course, since it's 2024, I have to talk about AI. Turns out this is actually a pretty good use for large language models because rather than just evaluating keywords from the text of a cookie notice, we can pass it to a large language model and ask it, is this a cookie notice element? And tell it to respond in one word, either yes or no. And it does a pretty good job of that, even without any examples, so zero-shot prompting. We don't have a version of this that we've crawled with yet, but in my initial testing, Llama 3's 8B works really well. And that's awesome because it's a fully local model as well. So we don't need to shell out to some third-party provider for it. And I should also mention, this works in other languages too. So like, I don't have to figure out how do you say cookies and privacy and analytics in every single language. And if there's like a baking site that's talking about cookies, it'll still work there too. It's not going to pull up the like cookie baking newsletter as a cookie notice. We'll take questions after. So another possible direction for improvement is automatic rule generation. If we can automatically detect cookie notices, then it's pretty great to be able to automatically propose filter list rules for them as well. It's not an extremely easy problem because you kind of want to come up with maybe candidates for each of the 4 different types of rules and choose the best one that's least likely to break the website in that particular case. And definitely you want to make sure that you're not breaking the website. And of course, you also want to fit a rule that you choose into EasyList cookie. So that means choosing one that can fit correctly inside the list and has the right kind of shape with the rest of the list context. Another potential improvement we can do is detecting other kinds of pop-ups. As it turns out, pop-ups in general are just kind of annoying. And so we do have like the newsletter annoyances list and a couple others. And we can detect all of these too. If we're using an LLM, we can just tweak the prompt a little bit rather than asking, is there a cookie notice here? We just say, is there a newsletter pop-up here? And suddenly we can classify these very easily and add them to the appropriate list as well. And finally, I would like to see this thing being used in browser environments as well. So I've put together a pretty quick web extension demo of using Cookie Monster inside a browser. And as it turns out, when you're using this, you can basically just browse the web normally. And as soon as you encounter a cookie notice, it'll automatically ask you if you want to report this upstream. So that's kind of cool as a proof of concept. But I think even further than that, we can take it to a point where if you ever browse the web and you find something that looks broken or annoying or whatever, you can click on a button that says, I want to fix this site, please. And the wizard will come and tell you like, hey, we detected 3 things on this site and we fixed them for you. Do you want to also report it upstream? Or if you prefer not to reveal that you visited the site, then you can just keep it locally and private. And that'll be an extremely huge improvement for our users because one of the big reasons that people are frustrated with ad blocking sometimes is that it breaks sites. So that is my kind of long-term vision for this kind of thing. But yeah, Cookie Monster is open source. If anyone's interested in taking a look at it or trying it out or reporting issues, maybe even some PRs, we're happy to accept those. And yeah, I'm excited about the future of this kind of thing where we're taking small parts of the filter list authorship experience and improving visibility over the entire internet drastically, and just kind of supercharging the experience of being a filter list maintainer. So yeah, thanks. And I'm happy to take questions as well.